Thomas Carter sat on the edge of his bed at 6 in the morning, staring at the pink paper in his hands. The words "final notice of eviction" seemed to get bigger every time he read them. 3 days. He had 3 days to come up with 2 months' rent, or he and his 8-year-old daughter would be out on the street. He folded the notice and shoved it into his back pocket, then looked around the small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was home. The walls needed paint, the carpet had stains that wouldn't come out, and the heater made weird noises at night. But it was theirs. His daughter's drawings covered the refrigerator. Her small bed sat in the corner of the living room because they couldn't afford a 2-bedroom place. Thomas walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror looked older than 34. Deep lines creased his forehead, and his eyes had dark circles under them. He hadn't slept well in months, not since the construction company he'd worked for went under. That company had been his main source of income for 6 years. When they closed, his phone stopped ringing. He'd been a painter his whole adult life. Started at 16, working summers with his uncle. By 20, he was running his own small operation. He was good at it, too. People used to call him all the time, asking when he could fit them in. But the economy had shifted, and folks were holding on to their money. Nobody wanted to pay for a fresh coat of paint when they were worried about keeping the lights on. His phone sat on the counter, silent as a stone. He picked it up and checked his bank account, even though he already knew what it would say. $47.18. His van needed new brakes, and the check engine light had been on for 2 weeks. His daughter needed a refill on her asthma medication in 5 days. The inhaler cost $60 without insurance, and he'd lost his insurance when the company folded. Thomas heard his daughter cough from the other room. It was that dry, wheezy cough that made his chest tighten with worry. He walked over and knelt beside her bed. She was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling with effort. He brushed the hair from her forehead and felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down on him. What kind of father couldn't even keep a roof over his kid's head? What kind of man let things get this bad? He stood up and went to the small closet where he kept his painting supplies. The buckets were mostly empty. He had maybe half a gallon of white paint left, a few brushes that had seen better days, and some rollers that needed replacing. His drop cloths were splattered with a rainbow of colors from 100 different jobs. He ran his hand over them, remembering better times. His daughter stirred and opened her eyes. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart. How you feeling?" She coughed again. "Okay, I guess. Is it Saturday?" "Yeah, it's Saturday. You want some breakfast? Can we have pancakes?" Thomas thought about the nearly empty pantry. "How about cereal today? I'll make you pancakes tomorrow, okay?" She nodded and sat up, reaching for her inhaler on the nightstand. She took 2 puffs, and Thomas watched her breathing slowly ease. The inhaler was almost empty. He tried not to think about it. After she ate her cereal and settled in front of the television with her coloring books, Thomas grabbed his jacket and the few supplies he had left. He needed to find work today, any work. He'd knock on doors, ask at hardware stores, check the community boards. Something had to come through. He kissed his daughter goodbye and told her to lock the door behind him. The neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, would check on her in an hour. The old woman had been a blessing, watching his daughter for free when Thomas needed to look for work. He didn't know what he'd do without her kindness. The morning air was cold and crisp. Thomas loaded his supplies into the back of his van, which coughed and sputtered before finally starting. He drove across town toward the nicer neighborhoods, the ones where people had money for home improvements. Maybe someone needed a quick paint job. Maybe someone would take pity on him. He spent 2 hours driving around, stopping at hardware stores and paint shops, asking if anyone had heard of work. Nothing. One store manager remembered him from the old days and offered him $20 to sweep up and organize the back room. Thomas took it. $20 was $20. By noon, his stomach was growling, but he didn't want to spend money on food. He drank water from a gas station fountain and kept driving. The fancy neighborhoods seemed to mock him with their perfect lawns and pristine houses. These people had everything. They had security. They had futures. He thought about his own future and came up blank. Where would they go if they got evicted? His daughter couldn't miss school. She was doing so well this year, finally making friends after being the new kid last year when they'd moved to this cheaper apartment. Starting over again would crush her. Thomas pulled over on a quiet street and put his head on the steering wheel. His hands were shaking. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to somehow make this all go away. But sitting in his van feeling sorry for himself wouldn't pay the rent. He lifted his head and took a deep breath. Then another. His uncle used to tell him that hard work and good character would always see a man through tough times. Thomas wasn't so sure anymore, but he didn't have any other options. He'd keep looking. He'd keep trying. He'd figure something out. He started the van again and drove deeper into the wealthy part of town. The houses here were massive, with long driveways and manicured gardens. Some had gates and security cameras. Thomas felt out of place in his beat-up van with its rattling engine and peeling paint company logo on the side. That's when he saw her. An old woman, probably in her 70s, standing in front of a beautiful mansion with a long white fence that ran along the entire property. She was holding a paintbrush and a small bucket, trying to paint the fence herself. Even from a distance, Thomas could see her moving slowly, painfully. She'd paint for a minute, then straighten up and press her hand to her lower back. The fence was in rough shape. The paint was peeling badly, and in some spots the wood looked weathered and gray. It would take days to properly repair and repaint the whole thing. What was this old woman thinking, trying to do it herself? Thomas drove past slowly, watching her in his rearview mirror. It wasn't his problem. He had his own troubles. But something made him stop the van at the end of the block. He sat there for a moment, arguing with himself. He couldn't afford to help someone for free. He needed to find paying work. Every hour mattered. But watching that old woman struggle with something he could fix so easily felt wrong. His uncle's voice echoed in his head again. Character. Doing the right thing even when it cost you something. Thomas put the van in reverse and backed up slowly. He parked across the street from the mansion and sat there for another moment, watching the woman paint. She was wearing old clothes and had paint in her gray hair. She looked tired and frustrated. Finally, Thomas got out of the van. He grabbed his supplies from the back and crossed the street. The woman looked up as he approached, her expression wary. "Excuse me, ma'am," Thomas said, trying to sound friendly and not like some creep bothering an old lady. "I'm a painter, and I couldn't help but notice you working on your fence. That's a big job to tackle alone." The woman straightened up, one hand still on her lower back. "Yes, well, it needs doing." "Paint doesn't apply itself?" "No, ma'am, it doesn't. Would you mind if I helped you out?" "I've got some time today, and I'd be happy to give you a hand." She looked at him suspiciously. "I can't pay you. That's why I'm doing it myself." Thomas nodded. "I understand. I'm not asking for payment, just offering to help." The woman studied his face for a long moment, and Thomas saw her expression slowly soften. Maybe she saw something honest there, or maybe she was just tired enough to accept help from a stranger. Either way, she finally nodded. "That's very kind of you." "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sure." And just like that, Thomas committed the last of his supplies and his entire day to helping a stranger for free, while his own world was falling apart. The old woman introduced herself as Eleanor Chen, and she seemed surprised when Thomas actually stayed to help. He got the feeling people didn't follow through on their promises very often in her experience. Thomas walked the length of the fence, examining it closely. It was even worse than it looked from the street. The wood was splitting in places, and years of weather had taken their toll. This wasn't just a paint job. The fence needed real repair work first. "Mrs. Chen, before we paint, I need to fix some of these boards. Do you have any tools I could use? Maybe some wood filler and sandpaper?" Eleanor nodded and led him to a garage that was bigger than his entire apartment. Inside, everything was organized and clean. Tools hung on pegboards labeled and arranged by size. Thomas felt a pang of envy. This woman had more equipment in her garage than he'd owned in his entire career. "My husband was particular about his tools," Eleanor said softly. "He passed away 2 years ago, cancer. The medical bills took everything. That's why I can't afford to hire help anymore." Thomas turned to look at her, really look at her. Her clothes were expensive but old. Her shoes were worn. The paint she'd been using was the cheapest brand from the hardware store, the kind that barely covered and wouldn't last through a single winter. "I'm sorry for your loss," Thomas said, and he meant it. Here he'd been feeling sorry for himself. But this woman had lost her husband and her financial security at the same time. At least he still had his daughter. At least he still had his health. "Thank you," Eleanor said. He was a good man. Built a successful business from nothing. Gave generously to others. But when he got sick, everything changed so fast. She paused, looking around the garage. I'm trying to sell the house, but the realtor says it needs work first. The fence is just the beginning. Thomas felt his throat tighten. She was trying to sell the home she'd built with her husband because she couldn't afford to keep it. And here she was, at her age, trying to fix it up herself because she couldn't pay anyone to help. Well, Thomas said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice, let's make this fence look amazing. That'll be a good start. He spent the next hour filling cracks, sanding rough spots, and replacing 2 boards that were beyond saving. Eleanor brought him water and tried to help, but Thomas gently insisted she rest. She'd done enough already. As he worked, they talked. Eleanor told him about her husband, about the life they'd built together. They'd had 1 son, but he was busy with his own life in another city. She didn't see him much anymore. What about you? Eleanor asked. You're clearly talented. Why are you spending your Saturday helping an old woman for free? Thomas paused, his hand on the sandpaper. He could have lied, could have made up some story about being a good Samaritan who just loved helping people. But something about Eleanor's honest eyes made him want to tell the truth. I'm broke, he said simply. Lost my main contract months ago and work dried up. I've got a daughter to take care of and I can't even do that right. We're getting evicted in 3 days. He laughed, but it came out bitter. So yeah, I probably should be out looking for paying work instead of painting your fence for free. But I saw you struggling and I couldn't just drive past. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You have a daughter? Yeah, she's 8. Smart as a whip, loves to draw. She's got asthma and her medication costs money I don't have. Thomas shook his head. Sorry, you don't need to hear my problems. You've got enough of your own. No, Eleanor said firmly. Don't apologize. We all have struggles. That's what makes us human. She paused. Your daughter is lucky to have a father with a good heart. Not everyone would stop to help a stranger when their own life is falling apart. Thomas didn't know what to say to that, so he just went back to work. He finished the repairs and started on the primer. His supplies were running low, but he'd make them stretch. He always did. Around noon, Eleanor disappeared into the house and came back with sandwiches and lemonade. You need to eat, she said in a tone that didn't allow for argument. They sat on the porch and Thomas ate slowly, savoring each bite. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him lunch. His daughter usually ate sandwiches he threw together in the morning before school. This sandwich had real turkey, fresh lettuce, and some kind of fancy mustard. It was delicious. Tell me about your daughter, Eleanor said, so Thomas did. He told her about the way his little girl laughed at silly jokes, about how she wanted to be an artist when she grew up, about how she colored pictures for him every day to cheer him up. He told her about the way she never complained even when they had cereal for dinner or when the heat didn't work right. He told her about the fear that kept him up at night, the terror that he was failing her. Eleanor listened to every word, her eyes soft with understanding. When he finished, she reached over and patted his hand. You're not failing her, she said. You're showing her what real love looks like. You're teaching her about hard work and perseverance. That's worth more than any amount of money. Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears, but he blinked them back. Tell that to my landlord. They finished lunch and Thomas got back to work. The primer went on smooth, covering the old gray wood with fresh white. As he painted, he fell into the rhythm he loved. Dip the brush, stroke, stroke, stroke. Move down the fence, repeat. It was meditative, calming. For a few hours, he could forget about his problems and just focus on making something look good. Eleanor tried to help again, and this time Thomas let her. She was slower than he was, and her strokes weren't as even, but she worked with determination. They painted side by side, and Thomas found himself actually enjoying the work. When was the last time he'd enjoyed anything? You know, Eleanor said after a while, my husband used to say that character is what you do when nobody's watching. When nobody will know if you cut corners or walk away. He said that's how you measure a person's real worth. Thomas thought about that as he painted. Nobody was watching him right now except Eleanor. He could have driven past this morning. He could have offered half-hearted help and left after an hour. But something in him wouldn't allow it. Maybe his uncle had taught him better than he realized. The afternoon stretched on. The sun moved across the sky and the fence slowly transformed from weathered gray to clean white. Thomas used up the last of his primer and started on the finish coat. His white paint was running low and he knew he wouldn't have enough to finish the job properly. But he'd do what he could. Around 3 o'clock, Eleanor's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it and Thomas heard her talking to someone. When she came back, she looked troubled. Is everything okay? Thomas asked. That was my son, Eleanor said. He calls every Saturday to check on me. I told him about you helping with the fence. She paused. He's worried I let a stranger onto the property. He's very protective, Thomas nodded. That's understandable. He's looking out for you. He asked if you needed money. I told him no, that you were just being kind. Eleanor looked at Thomas with something like sadness in her eyes. He didn't believe me. He said nobody does something for nothing anymore. Well, I guess I'm nobody then, Thomas said with a slight smile. Eleanor laughed. No, you're definitely somebody. You're somebody who gives me hope that there are still good people in the world. They worked until the sun started to set. Thomas had managed to cover about 3/4 of the fence with the finish coat. It looked 100 times better than when he'd started, even though it wasn't quite finished. I'm sorry, Thomas said, looking at his empty paint cans. I don't have enough to finish the last section. I used everything I had. Eleanor looked at the fence and tears filled her eyes. This is beautiful. You've done so much. I can't believe you spent your whole day helping me. It was a good day, Thomas said, and he realized he meant it. Despite everything, despite his problems waiting for him at home, this had been a good day. He'd done something that mattered. He'd helped someone who needed it. Eleanor insisted on walking him to his van. As he loaded his empty buckets and used brushes, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. Please, she said. It's all I can spare, but take it. For your daughter's medicine. Thomas looked at the money and felt something crack inside his chest. This woman, who'd just told him she couldn't afford to hire help, was trying to give him money. This woman who was losing her home was worried about his daughter. No, he said gently. Please keep it. You need it more than I do. But your daughter will be fine. I'll figure something out. I always do. Thomas closed the van door and turned to face Eleanor. Thank you for letting me help you today. It meant more to me than you know. Eleanor hugged him then, and Thomas hugged her back. When she pulled away, she was crying. You're a good man, she said. Whatever happens, remember that. You're a good man with a good heart, and that matters. Thomas drove away as the last light faded from the sky. In his rearview mirror, he could see Eleanor standing in front of her mostly painted fence, waving goodbye. He checked his phone at a red light and saw 3 missed calls from his landlord. His stomach dropped. He couldn't avoid it anymore. Monday was coming, and with it, the end of everything he'd been trying to hold together. But for today, for this one day, he'd done something right. He'd helped someone who needed it. His uncle would have been proud. Thomas drove home through the darkening streets, his van rattling and his heart heavy, not knowing that someone had been watching him all day long. Not knowing that his one act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Raymond Chen sat in his car across the street from his mother's house, watching a stranger paint her fence. He'd been there for almost an hour, and his initial alarm had slowly transformed into something else. Curiosity, maybe? Or confusion. He'd driven over immediately after his mother mentioned some painter helping her for free. Raymond didn't believe in free help. In his experience, everyone wanted something. His business success had taught him that much. People were always looking for an angle, always trying to get ahead. But this guy seemed different. Raymond had watched him work steadily for over an hour, carefully repairing damaged boards before even touching the paint. The man moved with the confidence of someone who knew his craft. Every motion was purposeful, efficient. This wasn't someone doing the bare minimum. This was someone who took pride in his work. Raymond pulled out his phone and started recording. He wasn't sure why. Maybe for evidence if the guy turned out to be a con artist. Maybe because his mother had seemed so touched by this stranger's kindness, and Raymond wanted to understand what he was missing. Through his phone screen, he watched the painter and his mother sit down for lunch. They were talking, laughing even. His mother looked happy in a way Raymond hadn't seen since his father died. That squeeze in his chest was guilt, he realized. When was the last time he'd made his mother laugh like that? He'd been busy. That was always the excuse. His real estate development company was expanding rapidly, and there were always deals to close, properties to inspect, investors to schmooze. He called his mother every Saturday, sent her money monthly even though she always refused it, and visited on major holidays. That should be enough, shouldn't it? But watching some stranger spend his entire Saturday helping her made Raymond question everything. This man clearly had nothing. His van was falling apart, held together by rust and hope. His clothes were worn and paint-stained, yet here he was, giving his time freely to someone he'd probably never see again. Raymond zoomed in on the painter's face. The man looked tired, older than he probably was. There were worry lines etched deep around his eyes. This was someone carrying heavy burdens. So why was he here instead of solving his own problems? After lunch, Raymond watched them paint together. His mother moved slowly, carefully, and the painter adjusted his pace to match hers. He never showed impatience or frustration. He just worked alongside her, occasionally offering guidance but mostly letting her contribute. Something about the scene made Raymond's throat tight. His father used to paint with his mother like that. On weekends, they'd tackle projects around the house together, working side by side. Raymond had been too young to help much, but he remembered their laughter, their teamwork. His parents had built everything together, from their business to their home to their life, and then cancer took his father, and the medical bills took everything else. Raymond had offered to pay off the debts, to let his mother keep the house, but she'd refused. Pride, she said. His father wouldn't have wanted their son fixing their mistakes. They'd managed their own affairs for 50 years, and she'd manage this too. But managing meant selling the house she loved, downsizing to something affordable, leaving behind a lifetime of memories. Raymond had argued, begged, even tried to pay off the debt secretly through a lawyer. His mother found out and was furious. They hadn't spoken for 2 weeks after that, so he'd backed off, respected her wishes, and hated himself for it. What good was success if he couldn't help his own mother? What was the point of all his money? If she was out here painting her own fence because she couldn't afford to hire someone? Raymond's phone call with his mother had been tense. He demanded to know who this stranger was, whether she'd checked his background if he'd asked for money. She'd sounded hurt by his suspicion, defensive of the painter's character. That made him feel even worse. He's a good man going through hard times, she'd said, and he stopped to help someone else despite his own troubles. That's character, Raymond. That's what your father always talked about. There it was again. His father's ghost, reminding Raymond of all the ways he wasn't measuring up. His father had been generous to a fault, always helping neighbors and strangers. Raymond had learned business savvy from him, but apparently missed the lessons about humanity. As the afternoon wore on, Raymond found himself researching the painter. The logo on the van was faded but readable. A quick internet search brought up a website that hadn't been updated in months, a Facebook page with a handful of 5-star reviews from years ago, and a post in a local community group that made Raymond's chest hurt. The post was from 3 days ago. Experienced painter looking for any work. Good with repairs, detail work, interiors and exteriors. Fair prices, quality guaranteed. Need jobs urgently. Please share. Below that, someone had commented asking if he was okay. The painter had responded, "Going through a rough patch, but we'll figure it out. Just need some work to come through." Raymond clicked on the painter's profile. There wasn't much. A few photos of completed jobs, all showing impressive work. A picture of a little girl holding up a painting she'd made. The caption read, "My daughter, my inspiration. She reminds me why I keep pushing forward." In another community group, Raymond found a more recent post that made him put down his phone and close his eyes. Someone had shared a list of local families needing help, and next to the painter's name was a note. Facing eviction. Single father. Has been good to this community and could use support if anyone has painting work. So that's what this was. This man was days away from losing his home, probably scared out of his mind about what would happen to his daughter, and he'd spent his entire day painting a stranger's fence for free. That wasn't stupidity. That wasn't poor judgment. That was character on a level Raymond rarely encountered in his world of business deals and profit margins. He thought about the contractors he worked with, the ones who cut corners when they thought he wasn't looking, who inflated invoices and blamed delays on weather that never happened. He thought about the painters his company hired, who did acceptable work for good money and moved on to the next job without a backward glance. Then he thought about this stranger, using the last of his supplies to help his mother, refusing payment, working with care and pride despite having every reason to be bitter and selfish. What kind of person did that? More importantly, what kind of world had Raymond built where such behavior seemed so rare it was shocking? The sun was setting when the painter finally packed up. Raymond watched him load his empty buckets into the van, watched his mother try to give him money, watched him refuse. He watched them hug, saw how his mother cried, saw how the painter smiled sadly and drove away in his dying van. Raymond sat in his car for another 20 minutes after the painter left, thinking. An idea was forming, one that felt right in a way his business deals rarely did. He wasn't sure exactly how to execute it yet, but he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to help this man the way the man had helped his mother. But more than that, he wanted to understand what drove someone to act with such pure kindness. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant about a meeting Monday morning with potential investors. Raymond looked at it and felt nothing. Another deal. Another pile of money. Another property to develop. It all felt hollow suddenly. He got out of his car and walked across the street to his mother's house. She was still standing by the fence, running her hand along the freshly painted wood. She jumped when she saw him. "Raymond, what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," he lied. "Thought I'd stop by and see the fence you mentioned." His mother's eyes were red from crying, but she smiled. "It's beautiful, isn't it? He did such wonderful work, and he wouldn't take a single dollar." Raymond walked the length of the fence, examining the work. It was excellent. Every board was carefully prepared, every stroke of paint even and precise. This was the work of someone who cared about quality, even when no one would know the difference, even when he had nothing to gain. "Tell me about him," Raymond said. "The painter." So his mother did. She told him about their conversations, about the man's daughter and his struggles, about his kindness and humility. She told him about his empty paint cans and his worn brushes, about how he'd used every last bit of his supplies to help her. "He reminded me of your father," she said softly. "Not in looks, but in spirit. Your father would have done the same thing, would have helped a stranger without thinking twice about what it cost him." Raymond felt that guilt again, sharper this time. "I'm not Dad," he said quietly. "No," his mother agreed. "You're not. You're Raymond, and you're building your own legacy. But sometimes I worry you've forgotten where you came from. You've forgotten that success means nothing if you can't help others along the way." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Raymond spoke. "What if I could help him, the painter? Would that bother you? Would you think I was interfering?" His mother looked at him with surprise. "Help him how?" "I don't know yet. But he clearly has skills and character. Those are hard to find. Maybe there's a way to give him a chance without making it feel like charity." His mother's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were happy tears. She reached up and cupped Raymond's face in her hands the way she used to when he was a child. "Your father would be so proud of you right now," she said. Raymond drove home that night with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He spent Sunday researching the painter's background, reading reviews from old clients, checking references. Everything confirmed what he'd observed. This was a skilled craftsman with integrity who'd fallen on hard times through no fault of his own. By Sunday night, Raymond had a plan. It was bold, maybe crazy, but it felt right. He'd spent years building a business based on profit margins and smart investments. Maybe it was time to invest in something that couldn't be measured in dollars. He called his lawyer and his HR director, explaining what he wanted to do. They both thought he was insane. You don't hire someone based on watching them paint a fence for free. You don't offer a significant position to someone you've never met. But Raymond's instincts were telling him this was right, and his instincts had made him millions. Monday morning, he had his assistant track down the painter's phone number. Then he sat at his desk staring at his phone, preparing to make a call that would change at least 2 lives. Maybe more. He thought about his mother's words, about character, about his father's legacy, about the kind of man he wanted to be versus the kind of man he'd become. This painter had reminded him of something important, something he'd lost in the pursuit of success. Sometimes the best investments aren't the ones that make the most money. Sometimes they're the ones that remind you why you started building something in the first place. Raymond picked up his phone and dialed. After 3 rings, someone answered. A tired voice, wary and confused. Hello? Hello, is this Thomas Carter? My name is Raymond Chen. I believe you helped my mother with her fence this weekend. I was wondering if you'd have time to meet with me tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Raymond could almost hear the man's confusion, his suspicion, maybe his hope. What kind of something? The painter asked carefully. Thomas stood in front of the massive building downtown, checking the address on his phone for the 3rd time. This had to be wrong. The building was at least 12 stories tall, all glass and steel gleaming in the morning sun. The kind of place where important people worked, where deals worth millions happened every day. Not the kind of place where a broke painter belonged, but the address matched. Suite 1200. Raymond Chen's company, Chen Development Group. Thomas had looked it up last night after the strange phone call, and what he'd found made him even more confused. Raymond Chen was a big deal in real estate. His company had developed some of the most expensive properties in the city. This wasn't some small-time contractor looking for painters. This was a man who could hire anyone he wanted, so why call Thomas? He'd spent all of Sunday night worrying about it. Maybe Raymond thought Thomas was trying to scam his mother. Maybe this meeting was actually a warning to stay away. Maybe Raymond's mother had felt pressured to let Thomas help, and now her son was going to threaten him or worse. But something about Raymond's voice on the phone hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded careful, measured, but not hostile. And he'd asked if Thomas could come in for a meeting, not demanded it. Still, Thomas had almost not shown up. It was only the eviction notice that changed his mind. This morning, the landlord had called again, giving Thomas until end of business today to have the money or start packing. His daughter didn't know yet. She'd gone to school thinking everything was fine, and Thomas hadn't had the heart to tell her they might be homeless by tomorrow. So here he was, dressed in the only decent clothes he owned, a button-down shirt that was a little too tight and pants he'd worn to his uncle's funeral 3 years ago. His work boots were the best shoes he had. He hoped that would be okay. The lobby was intimidating. Marble floors, high ceilings, a security desk where 2 guards in uniform sat watching monitors. Thomas approached slowly, feeling completely out of place. "I'm here to see Raymond Chen," he said. "I have an appointment at 10. The guard checked his computer, then handed Thomas a visitor badge. 12th floor. Elevators are on your right." The elevator was glass, and Thomas watched the ground fall away as he rose higher and higher. His stomach felt like it was somewhere around the 6th floor. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a building this nice. Maybe never. The 12th floor opened into a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Leather chairs, modern art on the walls. A receptionist sitting behind a curved desk that probably cost more than Thomas's van. "Thomas Carter?" she asked with a professional smile. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chen is expecting you. Conference room B just down this hall on your left." Thomas walked down the hall on carpet so thick his footsteps made no sound. Through glass walls, he could see people in meetings, pointing at screens and charts. Everyone looked confident, successful, like they belonged. Thomas felt like an imposter. Conference room B was all windows with a view of the city that made Thomas catch his breath. A huge table dominated the room, surrounded by expensive chairs. And at the head of the table sat Raymond Chen with Eleanor Chen beside him. Thomas stopped in the doorway, confused. "Mrs. Chen?" Eleanor stood up, smiling. "Hello, Thomas. I hope you don't mind that I'm here. Raymond wanted me present for this conversation." "I don't understand," Thomas said. Raymond stood as well, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming, Thomas. Please sit down." Thomas shook his hand and sat, feeling like he'd entered some alternate reality. Raymond was younger than Thomas expected, maybe early 40s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Thomas's old salary. But his handshake was firm, his eyes direct. "I'm going to be honest with you," Raymond began. "I was watching you on Saturday. I saw you help my mother with her fence." Thomas's stomach dropped. "I wasn't trying to, I just wanted to help. I wasn't looking for anything." "I know," Raymond said. "That's exactly why you're here. Can I ask you some questions?" Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. "Why did you stop? You didn't know my mother. You clearly had your own problems. Why spend your entire day helping a stranger for free?" Thomas looked at Eleanor, then back at Raymond. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I could help, so I should help. My uncle always said that character is what you do when nobody's watching. But someone was watching, Raymond said quietly. I was, and I want to know more about you. Tell me about your work history. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas talked about his uncle teaching him to paint, about starting his own small business, about the contracts he'd had and the company that went under, about his skills with restoration work, detail painting, color matching, about how he took pride in doing things right, even when it took longer. Raymond listened to every word, occasionally taking notes on a tablet. When Thomas finished, Raymond leaned back in his chair. I looked into your background, he said. Read reviews from your past clients. Everyone said the same things. Quality work. Fair prices. Trustworthy. One woman said you noticed water damage behind her kitchen cabinets and fixed it for free because you were worried it would cause problems later. Thomas shrugged. It was the right thing to do. Most contractors would have ignored it, would have finished the paint job and left. I'm not most contractors. No, Raymond agreed. You're not, and that's rare. In my business, I work with dozens of contractors, and most of them are looking for ways to cut corners, inflate invoices, blame delays on things beyond their control. Finding someone with actual integrity is almost impossible. Thomas didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Raymond stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city. My company is expanding. We specialize in historic building renovation, turning old properties into luxury condos and commercial spaces. The work requires craftsmen who understand restoration, who can match original finishes, who won't cut corners just to finish faster. He turned back to face Thomas. I've been looking for someone to lead the painting and finish work on our projects. Someone I can trust to maintain quality standards. Someone who understands that these buildings have history, and that history deserves respect. Thomas's heart started beating faster. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a 3-year contract. Salary of $85,000 annually, plus full benefits including health insurance for you and your daughter. You'd oversee all painting and finish work on my projects, hire and manage a small team. Ensure everything meets our quality standards. The room seemed to tilt. $85,000. That was more than Thomas had ever made in his life. That was security, stability, a future. I don't understand, Thomas said. Why me? You could hire anyone. Someone with more experience, with a bigger company, with references and credentials and... I could, Raymond interrupted. But I watched you spend your entire day helping my mother with nothing to gain. I read about your situation, about the eviction, about your daughter's medical needs, and instead of focusing on your own problems, you used your last supplies to help a stranger. That tells me more about your character than any resume could. Eleanor spoke up then, her voice gentle. You reminded Raymond of his father, of the kind of man who built his success on integrity, not just intelligence. We've been looking for someone like that for a long time. Thomas felt his eyes burning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen. People didn't get rescued from the edge of disaster by fairy godmothers and their generous sons. There's more, Raymond said. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. I own several renovated buildings around the city. One of them has a 2-bedroom unit available. It's yours rent-free for the first 2 years of your contract. After that, reduced rent if you want to stay. Thomas opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photos of a beautiful apartment. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, actual bedrooms with doors. A place his daughter could have her own room. A place with heat that worked and no stains on the carpet. Why? Thomas asked, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? Raymond sat back down and for the first time he smiled. My father built his business on a simple principle. Find good people and invest in them, not because it makes business sense, though it usually does, but because it's right. He believed that character mattered more than credentials, that integrity was worth more than experience. He paused, glancing at his mother. I forgot that for a while. Got caught up in profit margins and expansion plans. But watching you help my mother reminded me what my father tried to teach me. This isn't charity, Thomas. This is investment. I'm investing in someone with the kind of character my company needs. But what if I can't do it? Thomas asked. What if I'm not good enough? You're good enough, Eleanor said firmly. I saw the work you did on my fence. I saw your attention to detail, your pride in doing things right, and more importantly, I saw your heart. That's what matters. Raymond pulled out another document. This is the contract. It's straightforward, no hidden clauses. You'll start Monday, which gives you a few days to move into the apartment. I've included a signing bonus of $10,000. You can use it to settle your current debts, buy supplies, whatever you need. Thomas stared at the papers in front of him. A contract that would change his life. Security for his daughter. A real home. Health insurance so she could get her medicine without him lying awake at night worrying. A future that looked nothing like the disaster he'd been facing yesterday. I need you to understand something, Raymond said seriously. This isn't a handout. I expect quality work. I expect honesty. I expect you to build a team and maintain the standards my company is known for. This is a real job with real responsibilities? I understand, Thomas said. His hands were shaking so badly he had to set down the papers. If you take this job, you're representing my company. You're representing my father's legacy. Can you handle that? Thomas thought about his uncle, about the lessons in integrity and hard work. He thought about his daughter, about giving her the stability she deserved. He thought about Eleanor's fence, about doing the right thing even when it cost him everything. Yes, he said. I can handle that. Raymond extended his hand. Then welcome to Chen Development Group, Thomas Carter. Thomas shook his hand and suddenly he couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came in a rush, years of stress and fear and exhaustion pouring out of him. He tried to apologize, but Eleanor was already there, hugging him like she'd hugged him on Saturday. It's okay, she said softly. Let it out. You've been carrying too much alone for too long. Raymond put a hand on Thomas's shoulder and for a moment, the three of them just stood there in the conference room high above the city. Three people from completely different worlds, brought together by one act of kindness that somehow changed everything. When Thomas finally composed himself, he wiped his eyes and laughed shakily. I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. That was human, Raymond said, and there's nothing wrong with that. They spent the next hour going over details. Start date, apartment key pickup, employee orientation. Raymond's HR director came in to handle paperwork. They gave Thomas a check for $10,000 that felt like winning the lottery. They gave him a company credit card for supplies. They gave him a future. Thomas sat in his van outside his daughter's school, gripping the steering wheel and trying to stop his hands from shaking. In his pocket was a check for $10,000. In his bag was a signed contract that promised $85,000 a year. On the seat beside him were keys to an apartment they could move into this weekend. None of it felt real. He'd called his landlord from the Chen development office, using the conference room phone with Raymond's permission. The landlord had been hostile at first, demanding to know when Thomas would have the rent. Thomas had asked if he could wire the money that afternoon, all of it, including late fees. The silence on the other end had been satisfying. Now he just had to tell his daughter. She'd be coming out those doors any minute, and he'd tell her that everything was going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to have a real home, and she was going to have her own bedroom with a door she could close, and he was going to be able to afford her medicine without lying awake sick with worry. The school doors opened, and children poured out like water from a dam. Thomas spotted his daughter immediately, her backpack almost as big as she was, her hair in the ponytails he'd struggled to make that morning. She was walking with another little girl, laughing about something. When she saw the van, she waved goodbye to her friend and ran over. Hi, Dad. She climbed into the passenger seat, slightly out of breath. Guess what? I got an A on my spelling test. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. She buckled her seatbelt and pulled out her crumpled test paper to show him. 20 words, all spelled correctly, with a big red A and a smiley face at the top. Thomas felt his throat tighten. This smart, wonderful little girl had been so close to losing everything, and she hadn't even known it. Dad, are you okay? You look weird, Thomas laughed. I look weird? Yeah, like you're trying not to smile but also trying not to cry. It's a weird face. He put the van in drive and pulled away from the school. I've got some big news and I want to wait until we get home to tell you, okay? Her eyes went wide. Is it good news or bad news? It's very good news. The best news we've had in a long time. She bounced in her seat. Tell me now, please. When we get home. I promise. Can you wait 10 minutes? She groaned dramatically but nodded. Then she started telling him about her day, about the game they played at recess, about how her teacher read them a story about a dragon who was afraid of fire. Thomas listened to every word, savoring the normalcy of it. Soon these car rides would be different. Soon they'd be driving to a better place, a safer place. When they got to the apartment, Thomas led her inside and sat her down on the couch. She was practically vibrating with curiosity. "Okay," he said, kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. "Remember how we've been having some tough times lately?" Her face got serious. "Because you haven't had enough work." "Right, well, something amazing happened. I helped an old lady with her fence this weekend and her son saw me doing it. He owns a big company and he offered me a job." His daughter's eyes got even wider. "A real job? Like you used to have?" "Better than I used to have. It's a good job with a good salary, and it comes with health insurance, which means your medicine won't be expensive anymore." She threw her arms around his neck. "Really? So we don't have to move?" Thomas hugged her tight. "Actually, we do have to move. But we're moving to a better place. A much better place. It has 2 bedrooms, which means you get your own room." She pulled back to look at him. "My own room? With a door?" "With a door. And a closet, and we can paint it any color you want." The tears came then, sudden and surprising. His daughter had been so strong through everything, never complaining, never asking for things they couldn't afford. But now she was crying, and Thomas realized she'd been scared too. She'd understood more than he thought. "We're really going to be okay?" she asked between sobs. "We're really going to be okay, I promise." They sat on the couch together and Thomas told her the whole story. About Eleanor's fence, about Raymond watching him work, about the meeting that morning and the contract in the apartment. His daughter listened to every word, her eyes shining. "You helped someone even though we didn't have money?" she asked. "I helped someone because it was the right thing to do." She thought about that for a moment. "My teacher says that's called integrity. She says it means doing the right thing even when nobody's watching." Thomas smiled. "Your teacher is very smart, and someone was watching. And now good things happen because you were nice." She hugged him again. "I want to be like you when I grow up, Dad. I want to help people even when it's hard." Thomas held his daughter and felt something shift inside him. For months he'd felt like a failure, like he couldn't provide for her, couldn't give her what she needed, couldn't be the father she deserved. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe he'd been teaching her something more valuable than financial security. Maybe he'd been showing her what real character looked like. The next few days passed in a blur. Thomas deposited the check, paid his landlord, and started packing their meager belongings. Raymond had arranged for a moving company to help, but there wasn't much to move. A few boxes of clothes, some kitchen items, his daughter's drawings and books. Everything fit in one small truck. The new apartment was in a beautiful building in a safe neighborhood. When Thomas unlocked the door for the first time, his daughter gasped. Hardwood floors gleamed in the sunlight.